Reading 88 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 3. Great Amwell House, July 26, 1947. The idea of payment in the work. On one occasion, Mr. Ouspensky said, "If we attain happiness before we have paid for it, we shall not be able to keep it. We shall lose it, and what was happiness turns into pain. We must suffer first, and suffer now, to be free from everlasting suffering." And by suffering, in the work sense, is meant that suffering that goes with the effort to give up one's mechanical suffering, to give up useless suffering. How can this be done, was asked. The answer, in so many words, was, by not identifying with one's suffering. Nothing is more easy than to suffer. Everyone suffers, but this kind of suffering is not conscious, but mechanical, and simply leads to endless unhappiness, and indeed can become a bad habit that cannot be conquered. All this useless suffering belongs to the pain factory of organic life that cares nothing for humanity. It is an energy used by something else. No one evolves, no one becomes more conscious by identifying with useless suffering. Some people suffer if they cannot have their own way, even in the smallest detail. Even if it rains when they want to go out, they suffer. So everything becomes an increasing burden. They are only happy, so to speak, when they are ill. Mr. Ouspensky said many other things, at different times, about the necessity of giving up our suffering. One thing was that when people speak of sacrificing themselves, or ask what they should sacrifice, they speak as if they had something real to sacrifice. He said people have very big ideas about themselves, but really they have nothing of their own to sacrifice that is worthy enough to be called a sacrifice, save their suffering. If only, he said, people would observe their suffering, whether they show it, or endeavor to conceal it, or nurse it in secret, and would begin to sacrifice it, they would change their level of being and find themselves internally in better company. But it is extraordinary how people cling to their suffering and seem to feel they would cease to have any personal identity if they gave it up. I asked him whether, if humanity were at the third level of consciousness, which it was born with a right to be at, the world would still be full of useless suffering. He laughed and said, "How could it be? People would all remember themselves and so would not identify." Everyone has a grievance. Think of all the negative emotions with which people identify. Despair and horror and depression and dislike and worry and hate and 100 others. They do not see that all this is useless suffering and that they cannot have happiness while they are behaving like that. They are not fit for it. But if they pay long enough beforehand by work on themselves and learn how not to identify with their bad moods and separate from them, then they may reach happiness. Yes, on this earth. And he added, a man sitting in this room, appearing just as others, can be in a quite different inner state and experience quite different emotions and thoughts from everyone else, and yet show nothing outwardly unusual. Often Mr. Ouspensky emphasized that there were better states of ourselves and that everyone knew it. Asked once what the work is all about, he said, "It is about reaching a better state of oneself, learning what efforts are needed and what to avoid, and knowing how to maintain it." Reflect on all the work teaching practically, if you have not done so already. Begin to make an effort to see what it is about. It is not very difficult. Why, for example, does it speak so much about not identifying with negative states? You must understand, he said, looking on us all, that a negative state is not a better state of oneself. It is a worse state. But some of you do not yet understand. At the time, these words of Mr. Ouspensky seemed to awaken something in me. Although I had heard so often about negative states, it had not come home to me with any depth that I was so often negative, and that in a negative state one was not better but worse. Negative states seem to possess an energy of their own, and one tends to feel more vivid and alive when one identifies fully with them. That is, plunges head over heels into them. Only later does one see that this apparent accession of energy is due to a contraction of the whole being down to a few narrow, exacting, and often relentless eyes. Then, when one has escaped, say for a time, from their tyrannical power, one tastes the difference. When one can taste the difference, then one has started to understand what the work is about, namely, reaching a better state of oneself. The work assures us that this is possible and gives many ideas, diagrams, etc. concerning this. But it promises nothing. It says that if you value the teaching, listen to it and apply it to yourself with sincerity in daily life, you will get results. But each of you must understand that the work is not going to do your 3 lines of work for you. In any case, it would be impossible. You cannot make an effort for someone else who should make it.